Martini's dream was to use synods and not a council create change and revolution in the church. And Pope Francis has used synods, and when the synods haven't worked out the way he wanted them to work out, he's used just his own centralized power to make things happen. So I think the pontificate overall would be very favorable to the minds of the St. Goa Mafia.
Julia Meloni is going to be on the team. The St. Gallen Mafia, exposing the secret reformist group within the church. She wrote this probably 4 years ago or so. I interviewed her back then. I'm grateful to have her back on the team today. We're going to revisit this conversation, the St. Goa Mafia, their role in the last conclave, and what their role might be in the next one, too. What are the prospects? By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below. Julia Meloni joins us. She's got a book out that's been out about 4 years now called The St. Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church. In the book, you describe this cabal, this group, a secretive group of bishops and cardinals that gathered in St. Goa Mafia, calling themselves the Mafia, by the way. That was their term for their meetings. And they argued over potential new candidates, and they found a guy. They pushed for that guy, and that guy got the job. Give us the backstory real quick.
Yeah, so this was a group that met at or near St. Gallen, Switzerland, for really at least a decade. And initially, they were meeting during the pontificate of Pope John Paul II, and they really did not want Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger to succeed him as Pope. And so that was kind of the unifying theme, being anti-Ratzinger. And then as they continued, they did have an interest in Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Some of them were divided at different points about him. He was controversial even to the mafia. That's kind of an interesting point to mention. But yes, they did in many ways predict and lay the groundwork for themes like synodality and other buzzwords that we're seeing in this pontificate.
They argued over Bergoglio, right? He wasn't like an obvious pick. They weren't sure 100%. Martini wasn't sure. Silvestri, what was it? Silverstini seemed to like Bergoglio, but Martini wasn't as convinced. And Martini, who was not doing well health-wise and didn't have long to live, he had to be won over to the cause, didn't he?
That's exactly the case. Silvestrini was the main person who was interested in the question of who was going to succeed Pope John Paul II, and he wanted Bergoglio. And he was a maneuverer, and he was a plotter. So the division between Silvestrini and Martini, I think that helps explain part of why they were very disorganized overall in the 2005 conclave that elected Pope Benedict.
Do you think the St. Gallen Mafia is happy with their choice today?
That's a really great question. I think that there were certain themes that I could only allude to in my book because we needed to find out how the story would end. And one of those big themes was essentially this question of blessings for same-sex couples. And that's something that I did not know exactly how much time that would take or if it would even happen under this pontificate. And I got very surprised, and I think a lot of people were surprised, because even though we saw the hints that they wanted to go to this topic, we had to actually have the topic happen and the document Fiducia Supplicans come out to really see the fruition of that. So that was one thing that I think, the St. Goa Mafia would be very proud of that. And some of these topics where Francis actually does use the centralizing power, not the synodality power so much, but the centralizing power to just get something done.
Do you see a conclave coming soon? How do you see it? And is the St. Gallen Mafia meeting still? Are they still getting together? Or is there still a lobbying effort on par with the St. Gallen Mafia?
Most of the original members of the St. Gallen Mafia have passed away. And to my knowledge, Vatican watchers don't really discuss. There's no movement that says that they have specifically trained someone else to, be the next generation of the St Goa Mafia per se. But what I would argue is that these ideas under Pope Francis have gone mainstream, so that if someone knows that they want to be in favor with the current regime, they have certain words and certain themes that they would presumably want to stress. What I will say is I wonder, and this is just a speculation, but I do wonder if there is some kind of movement among the conservative cardinals to really make sure that the electors know, A, what's going on in this pontificate, and B, what is the background of some of the different people who are being discussed as potential candidates. In other words, we hear in Damian's article about notes and meetings and that sort of thing, but I also wonder if there are kind of broader objectives to maybe send books to different cardinals and maybe get them really apprised of what's going on. I would imagine, hopefully that the cardinals are discussing this in a more nuanced, a more kind of rich way this time.
Is there a potential for calm and peace out of the next conclave?
Yeah, I also left Damian's article with that impression, and I thought that was a very astute observation that he made, because when you think about it, Francis likes to say time is greater than space, and I think what he means is sometimes you have to have a lot of patience and you have to just sow the seeds of change. Well, I think he became impatient and kind of clumsy with fiducia supplicans and some of his other maneuvers in this pontificate. And now we're seeing the backlash. We see someone like Victor Manuel Fernandez, who, you alluded to earlier in the show, someone like him being appointed, as head of doctrine. And people are wondering what was going through the Pope's mind when he did this. So I think that I think in a lot of ways, there is the potential for some of this to backfire and for people to want relative tranquility and someone who's not going to be a diehard on a lot of these more liberal and revolutionary causes.
Do you think fiducia supplicans will have the biggest impact on the decision-making for the next conclave?
Yeah, I think that the case that Damian Thompson made for that point in his recent article really was very strong, because and he's done some follow-up remarks on Twitter as well that are very perceptive. And the idea is people don't want to worsen the divisions in the church right now. It's kind of like in this post-Vatican II world, there's always this possibility that some of the truces that people have made, or some of the issues that have been kind of negotiated in a certain way, there's always a possibility that a fire can happen. And I think what we saw with the outcome of fiducia supplicans on the ground, we saw probably the Pope was not anticipating, even though he talks about making a mess, probably he was not anticipating some of the very strong responses that we got from different parts of the world saying this does not apply to us. So I think that probably, as Damian says in his article, some of the people who have been seen as, Pope Francis in another form, Pope Francis in another guise, some of these more liberal contenders, such as Cardinal Tagle, Cardinal Supich, that sort of thing, probably it's not the most opportune moment for them right now.
What do you think about Archbishop Pizzaballa?
I think the fact that, again, Damian put him in this article, and there's been buzz about his candidacy from other Vatican watchers. I think that merits taking his candidacy, pretty seriously. At the same time, there's always this issue. I just have to always tell myself there's always this issue of the dark horse in a race, and possibility that some of the people that we are always, some of the people that we focus on and our immediate go-to names, we could be completely missing the mark about someone who's more under the radar. And I just want to point out really quickly, I have a chapter in my book called Dark Horse, and I'm talking in that chapter about the candidacy of Bergoglio in 2013. And I thought it was very interesting. Everyone thought he was too old, and everyone had kind of written him off, even though he had performed very well at the 2005 Conclave. But the truth, or the buzz, always gets out a little bit, even when you have this kind of dark horse situation. So it was very interesting, because in the book I also talk about how Chris Cuomo of CNN, for instance, was talking about Bergoglio because he was getting tips from bishops, and he was tweeting about them after the fact that he was getting these tips. And it's very interesting who might those bishops have been. And he said one of them at least was retired. But they were talking about Bergoglio and predicting him before he even came up. So it's a very, very interesting conversation to continue watching as it evolves.
I like the way you, in many of your interviews after your book published, you described Daniil's on the balcony next to Pope Francis, and the satisfaction on his face, and to think about the efforts of this group who nearly gave up. I mean, they were meeting, they had hoped to prevent Benedict XVI, something you said in the last segment, from the chair. They failed at that, kind of gave up, but then they circled back, and he got to have the victory lap. He got to be there on the stage to enjoy the moment. It really felt like they won in that moment. Do you agree?
Yeah, the pictures of him and the video of him, when you look at some of the different angles, it's kind of eerie, because it's definitely this sense of, to use his own word, a resurrection. So in his biography, they quoted part of a sermon that he gave at one point, and he talked about how Francis came. It was like Easter, and it was like a resurrection. So this is the talk of someone who was, in his own mind, completely vindicated through this pontificate. It's really quite stunning language.
Please talk about Lea Sai's former Cardinal McCarrick's role, the St Goa Mafia. Yeah, that's another one of those scandals of this current pontificate. Francis, he rehabilitated, and you even talk about that, rehabilitated not only McCarrick, but Daniil's as well. We sort of touched on that on the article. Julia, what would you say about Cardinal McCarrick and the Francis pontificate?
Well, Cardinal McCarrick, he famously boasted that at Villanova University, that he had been approached by a very influential Italian gentleman, and that he had been questioned about whether Bergoglio had a chance. And that exchange is, I don't know, it's always kind of haunted me, trying to piece together who might that gentleman have been. We don't know. But I was alluding to Chris Cuomo having inside information from at least one retired bishop that Bergoglio should be watched. And he was saying this, he was saying this on air before Bergoglio was elected and after it. I put it in the book, but he was tweeting about basically this encounter and that he had inside information. And I've always wondered, could McCarrick have been one of the people who apprised Chris Cuomo of Bergoglio? It's so many questions. And of course, there were big scandals about the fact that some of these people who seem to have been very close to Pope Francis's election seem to have gotten special treatment despite horrible allegations against them.
It seems like Martini might have had an inkling of that. Bergoglio's not really the guy, but he had to be convinced. But it seems like Bergoglio may have played a fast one with this group. And he even talks about that in his most recent interview, saying they used him against Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, and that conclave that elected Benedict XVI. Do you think the St. Goa Mafia was duped by Bergoglio? Do you think Francis was being disingenuous in that interview by admitting all of that? What do you think?
I think that Henry Sears, said, author of The Dictator Pope, said something very interesting when he said that Bergoglio was using the St. Gallen Mafia. That's an interesting way of putting it. At the same time, do I think that they were happy maybe to be used by Bergoglio because their agenda lived on for another day? I think so, because Martini's dream was to use synods and not a council create change and revolution in the church. So, and it's really quite brilliant when you think about it. You don't have to have a Vatican III off in the future. Imagine all the work of inviting so many council fathers to the council and actually logistically making it happen. His idea was you could use synods, and Pope Francis has used synods, and when the synods haven't worked out the way he wanted them to work out, he's used just his own centralized power to make things happen. So I think the pontificate overall would be very favorable to the minds of the St. Goa Mafia. And again, they had Daniels in their ranks. And so Daniels, who was accused of basically shielding a protege bishop who had who sexually abused his own nephew for over, I think, 10 years. So, I mean, it's very stomach turning, stuff that we're talking about here. And so that was the kind of person who was joking about being in a mafia. So, I mean, these people, I don't think they would have a problem with what has happened in this pontificate.
One of the other things you talk about in your book, Julia Meloni, is that they're not in the shadows anymore. They're not even pretending to hide it. They boast about it. Like we don't have to go to commentator talking heads on YouTube or beyond to get this information. You went right to the horse's mouth. You're citing all of their own sources. Like, they're happy to tell us what they think now.
Yeah, I think that was a really important part of the book for me, because I just had a hunch that they would want to boast about what they were doing. And especially when you look at Daniels, when he was promoting his authorized biography that really laid out, that basically on the eve of the second year of the Synod on the Family, he was kind of touring and talking about his authorized biography that talked about the St. Goa Mafia. And it was a bombshell, but he wanted it to be out in the open, even right before the Synod on the Family. So a lot of this material, I had to dig in different places for it, but it's public. I mean, basically everything is public record. It's not insinuation. It's not so-called conspiracy theory. It is actually what they or other people, publicly say about them. I think there are too many stories that we have about him trying to control people and attain power and being vengeful and being spiteful for us to just ignore, that reality of how power is working here. I think that if I could bring a couple of things really quickly into this conversation, Damian talks about a new book called The Synodal Pope, and it's by Tan Books, and I've actually written a review of it at LifeSite News. I think it's very good. So Damian paints it as, well, I think that Pope Francis is more kind of on the Peronism side. And then I would say yes, but also this book, The Synodal Pope, talks just about how much the Pope was formed in an environment of revolution. So political revolutionaries, church revolutionaries, think about the time of the Second Vatican Council and the different modernists who were active at that time. You also think about all the liberation theorists. Think about someone like Leonardo Boff, who helped write Laudato Si and helped inspire the Amazon Synod. So I think to understand the Pope, it's very important to understand, yes, how he wields power, but also the fact that he grew up in a milieu that was very much formed by the idea of revolution. And so there's this subversive streak to a lot of what he does and a lot of what he stands for that I don't think has been sufficiently appreciated yet. I think that I'm hoping more people will read this book, The Synodal Pope, and kind of educate themselves about what the author Jean-Pierre Moreau has put together for us about just how extensive this streak is. I wonder how many people have a nostalgia for Pope Benedict XVI and a nostalgia for someone who just the era preceding the current era. But we also know that if we have a nostalgia for Benedict XVI and that sort of thing, well, there were problems in his pontificate too, and of course he famously abdicated, and so that kind of talks about, it kind of evoked for me what you were saying about the holy person who maybe is not good at governance, and how he could be taken advantage of by different wolves and maneuverers and that sort of thing. I don't have a good answer for that question, and I don't know, again, how are the conservatives looking for someone who might be good at governing but also be above reproach?
Does Julia know what younger bishops, etc., are leaders today in the St. Gallen Mafia, or a similar group with that neoliberal mindset that has power to affect the conclave? Is there a new Martini out there?
I've never heard a Vatican analyst say that there is like a younger generation of the St. Gallen Mafia, or the St. Gallen Mafia per se is still meeting and here's the new Martini, here are the new members. I guess the point that I like to make is that these ideas they're mainstream with Pope Francis now. So you don't have to actually be in the St. Gallen Mafia. You don't have to be a Martini to possibly be an heir to his dream. And his dream, again, I'll say it over and over. It's synodality. It's synods. When you see the word synodality, think Martini. The idea is to use synods and other, kind of decentralized mechanisms to change the church and revolutionize it without a council. So that idea, you have to be on board with synodality these days to be in favor with the current regime. So in that case, these ideas are just in the air everywhere. I alluded to this earlier, but the blessings for same-sex couples was something that was absolutely on the St. Gallen Mafia agenda, and we didn't know how it was going to turn out. And we see now how it's turned out, and we'll see how much more backlash they'll get for that. So in terms of the big items that they needed to get done, and the blessings for same-sex couples, that was part of the fight it was alluded to at the Synod on the Family all the way in the very beginning stages of this pontificate. So they've accomplished that. As far as things being permanent, I like what Roberto de Mattei, the historian, says, which is basically Francis does not want to pronounce anything, ex cathedra, ex infallibly. He's not going to do that, okay? And what we can hope for is a future pope who will love tradition and who will set things right. And basically, all is not lost. We're waiting and praying and sacrificing for the good of our church and the day when we will have some positive changes to the church. I think that what's going on in the church is a great spur to piety and to holiness in our own lives, because if we don't know what's going on and we don't talk and we don't consume news from people who know what's going on as well, then it's very easy for the forces influenced by the St. Gallen Mafia to have us on board. And I feel like at the beginning of this pontificate, I was just focused on being joyful, and I would not read anything that was even a little bit critical about what was going on in Rome,
Really?
and even a little bit critical of the Pope. And I felt very happy. I felt like it was in a honeymoon phase. But then I started allowing myself to read things like Crisis Magazine during Amoris Laetitia. And I started actually, using my reason, trying to figure out what was going on. And then I realized as I was reading things like that, I was also reading the saints. So my favorite book is Preparation for Death by St. Alphonsus de Liguori.
Oof.
And I was reading that kind of material while I was reading about Amoris Laetitia. And I said, wait a minute, this is not something that St. Alphonsus de Liguori would have written. And it wasn't, because the principal ghostwriter of Amoris Laetitia is Tucho Fernandez. So that's just a fact. We can try to cover our eyes and our ears and not focus on that, or we can do something about it, and we can talk about what's going on. A lot of times backlash against something is the only, reason that anything gets done about it. So it is important for us to talk about these sorts of conversations and to increase our piety and our prayer and our penance. And specifically, I would say under the mantle of Our Lady of Fatima.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.